Washington Journal continues.
And we welcome now Republican Congressman Clay Higgins, a Republican from Louisiana, joining us from Capitol Hill. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, John.
Member of the Homeland Security Committee, it was during a committee hearing last month that you informed Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas that if and when Republicans retake the House, he should expect to face impeachment. What would be in those articles of impeachment?
Well, first of all, I hope the Secretary heeds my fair warning, because it absolutely will happen. If he's still in office next year, he'll be impeached. Without getting into the weeds of the articles themselves, because some of that data is embargoed for obvious reasons, the Secretary Mayorkas has allowed himself to become the instrument of the Biden policies that have most certainly violated the constitutionally clarified responsibility of the federal government to maintain the sovereignty of our borders. The several states are assured in our Constitution that the federal government will perform that role, and this is a duty that we've never failed as a federal government until now. So, to an extreme extent, Secretary Mayorkas has performed outside of the parameters of his oath, and he has therefore in several manners violated impeachable level offenses. So he's going to find himself on the carpet in a real bad way if he's still in office. It'd be better for him to resign, as I told him, to save the nation that pain, so that we can move forward with reestablishing the sovereignty and security of our southern border.
How important is Title 42 to establishing the sovereignty and security of our southern borders?
Well, Title 42 is currently a legal mechanism that Border Security is able to employ in order to quickly reject an illegal alien attempting to cross that's had initial interaction with the American law enforcement at the border. So the effectiveness of Title 42 is the significant, should be our focus. We as a Congress must continue to provide our law enforcement professionals with the legal mechanisms that they need in order to accomplish their mission. So Title 42 was enacted at a time of pandemic worldwide. It was sound, and what we have learned is that it's been very effective. Without Title 42, we would have had literally millions of more crossings. So what we need to do as we look at the future is ask ourselves, is the Title 42 definitions, we believe, some of the most conservative of us in Congress believe that Title 42 itself is broad enough to consider the national health impact of fentanyl being brought across. So that's certainly, I mean, is the leading cause of death of Americans 18 to 45 is overdose, and that's just primarily driven by fentanyl, which is primarily crossing our southern border. So it's certainly a health crisis, and it's directly related to the lack of security at our border. So there are those of us that have studied this issue very carefully, because we're constitutionalists, and although we recognize the effectiveness of Title 42, we also recognize that it was largely based upon the health crisis of the COVID pandemic, and therefore had a sort of a built-in sunset. And yet, as we look at the effectiveness of Title 42 as a means by which to control our border and illegal immigration, we can realistically consider continuing the same mechanism, but with a broader definition to include the health impact and the crisis that's been brought upon America by illegal, illicit fentanyl crossing the border.
Let me invite viewers to join this conversation with Congressman Clay Higgins. He's with us for about the next 20 minutes, so go ahead and start calling in. Democrats, it's 202-748-8000. Republicans, 202-748-8001. And Independents, 202-748-8002. Congressman, let me shift gears from Homeland Security to Foreign Affairs. The vote on the House floor this week to send an additional $40 billion in aid to Ukraine. You were one of the 57 House members who voted against that. Why?
Yes, sir. Although I support Ukraine's effort to defend its sovereignty, and I've been a significant voice in that from the beginning, I serve the American people, and I'm sworn by oath to watch legislation very carefully. And if it's not righteous, or if it doesn't meet the threshold of what I believe my core principles require me to review, then I have to be a no. So this bill was introduced. The details of the bill were released 5 hours before the vote. $40 billion. That's 40,000 million. To put this in perspective, that's essentially the entire annual budget of the Customs and Border Protection, ICE, TSA, and the Coast Guard. And, we certainly, to fund our own border security is quite a long process through appropriations and debate and regular order and amendments considered and voted on. We certainly have time to read the legislation and debate and argue over what's in it and that should not be in it, or what's not in it that should be in it. All of this happens in Congress as the founders intended. And yet, this $40 billion was dropped on us 5 hours before a vote. Nobody read that. Nobody had teams of staff reading that legislation. A tremendous amount of money turned over to an executive branch that, quite frankly, I'd find it very difficult to trust. So although I support Ukraine and its defense, and I think we should have been more aggressive in our involvement early on before Russia began this renewed invasion of Ukraine that they began in 2014, by the way, to be clear. So I think we should have been more aggressively involved in Ukraine as they're our ally. However, the reality is we were not, and Russia took advantage of the postured weakness that America has shown over the last year and a half. And here we are. We're engaged in Ukraine. And I certainly support my Ukrainian brothers and sisters that are standing on the front line of freedom in Europe at this time. However, again, I work for the American people. And $40 billion of foreign military aid passed under a rule, a procedure in the House under a rule, not regular order, no debate, no amendments, passed in 5 hours. I was a solid no, and I would be again in the same circumstances.
Congressman Clay Higgins, an Army veteran, former police patrol officer, a captain in the St. Landry Parish Sheriff's Office, third-term congressman now representing the 3rd District of Louisiana. Here to take your phone calls, take your questions, and we have plenty of callers for you. Congressman Carla's up first out of Wayne City, Illinois. Line for Republicans, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Doing well. You're on with Congressman Higgins.
Hi, Representative Higgins.
Good morning.
I have a few questions, and they're referring to Ukraine, one of them Ukraine. Now, we have an open border, and they're shipping $40 billion to Ukraine. How come we can't take $5 billion of that and finish the law? And
well, madam, I echo your concern. Just a few moments ago, I compared the $40 billion in foreign military aid that the House just authorized. I voted against it, but it passed, and we're sending $40 billion in military aid to help Ukraine re-secure their nation, and yet we have the disintegration of our own sovereignty, our own southern border. heavily impacting America, generationally having a very negative impact on America, and yet, you know, we can't get our own treasure invested behind policy that's effective to secure our own border. So I'm with you on that. You'll find me a very accessible congressional representative for the policies that reflect, as the founders intended, primarily the security of our nation. That's our #1 job.
Lanham,
what's your next question, ma'am?
Lanham, Maryland, we've got Blake waiting on the line for independence. Blake, go ahead. We lost Blake. To Hot Springs, Arkansas, JB, line for Democrats. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. How you doing?
Good morning, JB.
Congressman, I understand that David Duke was the first one that came up with that idea of a border wall down there. Is that true?
Well, that's sort of an inflammatory question, I suppose, sir. We expect that in today's divided nation. But let me tell you, brother, it doesn't have to be this way. You know, you bring up a name like that, sort of a gimmick on television here. But let me just say that I'm pretty sure that if you own property, you have a fence around that property. You also have a gate. You don't have a fence around your property because you don't want your neighbors to visit. You don't have a gate because you want to keep them out. You have a gate because you want them to visit coming through the gate. America has gates. We have a responsibility to secure our border. And a physical barrier, if you have any kind of law enforcement experience or just life experience in general, you know, there's a big difference between having a fence and not needing it versus not having a fence and needing it. That's where we are on the southern border.
You talk about law enforcement experience. What does that mean? How has that shaped your job as a member of Congress?
Well, my experience working night shift for many, many years. I was a SWAT cop for 12 years, so I've experienced the most tragic circumstances that one could ever imagine during the course of my law enforcement career. And I learned early on that to be a presence of calm in the midst of a situation where everyone has lost their mind is the path towards resolution. And you know, to take the approach that you have to try to out-yell everybody is you'll never win. So if a family calls the police at 2 o'clock in the morning, they didn't call because they're having a good day. Something very wrong has happened in their life. You find yourself as a police officer all alone. You back up, you could be far away, half an hour away, 20 minutes away, having to deal with a very dangerous situation, sometimes drugs, alcohol involved, a lot of emotions. You have to be a presence of calm, reassurance, and confidence in order to establish order there. So I have found that that's largely this environment in Congress. You have a great deal of vitriolic division, and a man like me with the background that the Lord has provided me with during the course of my life and my journey in life, I have been equipped with the proper skills to deal with the divisions that I witness on a daily basis here in Congress. And I use those skills. I'm prayerful that I'm using those skills in a manner worthy of the oath that I've sworn to the American people.
Tampa, Florida. Mike, line for Republicans. Good morning.
How you doing? How you doing, Congressman?
Mike, I'm well, sir.
Appreciate all your service there for the police and everything. I'm against the money that's been appropriated. I do think we, need the border wall and everything. What gets me is how come spending such utterly vast amounts of money can't be put to a common vote, because, letting a few people in Congress, I know they're supposed to represent the people, but the people ain't being represented at all. How come can't, put it to a common vote when all this kind of vast amount of money. I mean, I'm on Social Security, can't afford nothing. Money ain't going up, but prices sure are. I mean, we're just getting poorer and poorer.
So, Mike, you want a national referendum on when it comes to certain levels of spending? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, something like that, man. Because $40 billion could sure go a long way here, for the poor folks and everything.
Mike, let me jump in here, sir. Let me jump in here. What you're asking for is it's certainly reflective of the common sense approach, but that would require an amendment to our Constitution. The founders intended for all federal spending to be borne in the House of Representatives, and the election cycle for a member of Congress in the House is 2 years. Why so short? Because the founders wanted the people of the sovereign states that are represented in Congress by their chosen man or woman. The founders wanted we, the people, to be able to quickly replace a bad representatives. And one of the primary reasons that the founders, during the debates, if you go back and read carefully what they discussed and how the details of our Constitution emerged, the founders were concerned about the wasteful spending of American treasure or corruption born in the souls of man that could be made manifest here in the halls of power of Congress. So you have the power, good sir. We the people have the power to effectively manage our appropriated treasure in Congress. We have the power over that expenditure by the ballot. We replace representatives that are not fiscally responsible, that don't understand that we have mortgaged the future of our nation as far as the eye can see, well into generations yet unborn. If I may just for a second put this in perspective, all spending is born in the House of Representatives, every dime, again, as the founders intended. This body has managed to accumulate $31 trillion in debt. If this same body, if Congress and the House of Representatives were to balance the budget and manage a $1 billion surplus, meaning that Congress will spend $1 billion less in federal monies than it took in federal revenues. $1 billion surplus. Sounds pretty good, right? Billions, 1,000 million. It would require 31,000 years of a $1 billion surplus to address a $31 trillion debt. Now, none of us present or viewing believe we have 31,000 years to fix this thing. And yet my Democratic colleagues, they want to raise the debt ceiling to $45 trillion or eliminate it completely. I mean, it's insane. We don't have this money. The $40 billion we just sent to Ukraine, I voted no for different reasons, but one of those dynamics that came into my consideration was 100% of that $40 billion was deficit spending. Was it deficits on the Ukrainian people? No. It was further deficit spending added to the debt of the American people. So we can fix this thing, Mike, but we have to be courageous during the voting cycles. Elections have consequences. We can fix the problems with America at the ballot box.
Just about 5 minutes left with Congressman Clay Higgins, the Republican of Louisiana. Let's just keep chatting with callers. This is Larry, Petersburg, Illinois, independent. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. And nice to be able to talk to you, Representative. And
good morning, Larry.
Here's my concerns. I mean, I'm with you on this, and as we listen, I'm an independent, and as I listen to all the different things we hear, everything seems like it's got to be a Republican versus Democrat, and I don't understand why everybody isn't concerned about what's happening at our border. I don't know if people aren't watching. Other TV networks aren't showing those massive amounts coming across, and they won't go to Fox because everybody thinks Fox is lies. But here's the thing, that this is going to affect all of us. I mean, you're talking about the deficit and the housing situation's really bad. My daughter lives in Kansas City. They just tried to purchase a home. They were bidding on a $300,000 home, which a few years ago, less than 10 years ago, was probably a $150,000 home. They were looking at in the $300,000 price range, and they were bidding $40,000 over the asking price, and they weren't getting the bid. So we got big problems there. But when it comes to the food shortages, when we've got 2 million people crossing our border in a year's time, and probably more in the next year, what's that going to do to compound these basic problems we got, sir?
2.5 million illegals crossed last year, and about 500,000 of those is an estimated number. It's a low estimation. Was what they call gotaways. These are young men that are stout, and they purposefully avoid interaction and arrest by law enforcement. These are guys coming to plug themselves into the criminal network across the country. They're coming to a neighborhood near you. That's just reality. The bottom line is, you know, the policies out of this administration have totally weakened our border. The men and women down there, it's the same men and women you had in 2019. We had this thing under control. The same assets, the same 1,954 miles of border, the same agents, the same vehicles, the same technologies, and yet we had it under control. It's totally lost right now. We're losing our country down there. We cannot absorb, as a sovereign nation, we cannot absorb 2-3 million illegal crossings a day. These folks are not coming, you know, for vacation. They're coming to stay. So we could get control of it very quickly. I've said before, 2 weeks. You put me in charge of the border, 2 weeks, we can stop this thing if I had the authority to do what needed to be done. And it would be compassionate, it would be legal, but it would be strict and disciplined. But we would reestablish the sovereignty of our southern border. So we can fix this thing, sir, on the southern border, but if we do not, we're gradually allowing the erosion of the very culture and fabric of our country. And we, of course, we're a nation of immigrants, but we're a nation of legal immigrants. We want our brothers and sisters, children of God from across the world, to come to America for the right reasons in the right way. But in order for America to remain the light of the free world, we have to restore the sovereignty of our nation, and that ties into the fiscal responsibility that we must reestablish here in Congress we were discussing earlier. So I thank you for your questions.
Just 2 minutes left. Let me get in. Joel has been waiting in Michigan, line for Democrats. Last caller this morning. Joel, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I was listening to you, and what you said was about the spending. Your words were, "I believe," you know, and what it should have been was what your people that you elected you believe. You know, it should be the spending, not what you believe. You're a representative of the people, and your vote should be what they believe. And the second thing I want to say is that if this border...
Before you move past that, sir, let me just say that the constituents that elected me because of the man that I am. We're all children of God on a different journey. I have my core principles, my beliefs. I presented that to the people that cast votes, and I've been elected by an overwhelming majority in my district. So it's impossible to go to 755,000 constituents and sort of poll their belief vote by vote. Those men and women elected a man just like you, Yeah, I have my beliefs and my core principles, and I stand upon those principles, and that's how I cast my vote. So I appreciate what you're saying, but
from the people that you elect, you still stand by your core values.
Congressman, I'll give you the last 30 seconds here.
Well, I appreciate the questions across the spectrum. You know, it's important for us as Americans to understand that we are brothers and sisters of one nation. The flag that waves in glory above us is woven of thread that reflects all of us, our history, our family, our culture, our heritage, our creed, our color, our political affiliation. All of this is part of the woven fabric of that flag, and what makes America great is when we can communicate like this and share candidly our beliefs. I believe there's a bright future for our country always yet ahead.
Congressman, appreciate your time this morning. Come back again, chat with some more callers down the road.
Yes, sir. Thank you. God bless.